you all hear me?
Yes.
Yeah. They could hear you, but they couldn't hear you.
Oh, the
over
live stream.
internet.
Okay. God guides me in straight paths for God's name's sake. Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for God is with me. God's rod and staff, they comfort me. God prepares a table before me in the presence of mine enemies. God has anointed my head with oil. My cup runneth over. Surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life, and I shall dwell in the house of God forever. Good morning, everyone, and thank you all for being here to celebrate my mother Renate's life and to mourn her passing. Renate Gumprecht was born in 1937 in Hamburg, Germany, at the epicenter of one of the vilest and most depraved chapters of world history, both in time and place. The year of her birth was also the year the concentration camp Buchenwald was opened, as well as the infamous anti-Semitic exhibition Der ewige Jude in Munich. Renate's birth as the third of three daughters was unexpected, and when she arrived, her family was already engaged in the struggle to escape and survive, which would dominate the first years of her family life. My grandfather, Werner Gerhardt, was a charming, handsome, confident, and cocky man who refused to follow the Nazis' decrees. My mother told us of the time he was out past curfew and how she hid under her bed when the Gestapo came to the door. My quick-thinking grandmother, Edith Alfreda, said he was at a doctor's appointment and the next day found a doctor to sign off. The three little girls huddled behind the door in fear whenever their mother left the apartment to shop, and were careful to not look towards the SS office on the ground floor when they went out. It was my resourceful grandmother who left no stone unturned, finding the necessary sponsors to get the family to the United States. Her grandmother was one of the Bulovas of Prague, the watchmakers, and she was able to get their sponsorship in the U.S., which was the final group of papers needed. Unfortunately, my mother's grandmother was too ill to travel, and her grandfather stayed behind to care for her. In July of 1941, the family of five left Hamburg on a treacherous journey by train across Europe to Spain, where they waited for passage on a ship. They waited so long in Spain that their papers expired, and they had to start the process all over again. Finally, in September of 1941, they set out for the USA via Cuba. My grandfather kept a diary of that journey, which we will have available at my house afterwards. The SS Navamar carried 1,120 European Jewish refugees to the United States in overcrowded and unsanitary conditions on a ship that was designed to hold 10. My mother recalls the stench of the hold and sleeping on the deck to escape it. Even as they sailed across the ocean, the remaining Jews of Hamburg, including their grandfather, were deported to Lodz to be murdered. Also on the ship was Marc Chagall's daughter, Ida. Chagall wrote to a friend expressing his concern for his daughter Ida and her husband, Michel Rappaport, who were on the SS Navamar smuggling a large case of Chagall's work. He wrote, "We read today, in a Russian newspaper, that Navamar is a floating concentration camp, that there is no water or the least of conveniences." The painter writes, "Oh God, how the people suffer there." When the family arrived in New York City, the three little girls, in their identical pinafores and clutching their china dolls, which my mother kept with her until the end of her life, captured the eyes of the world in a photo in the New York Times, captioned, "It was strange that not a tear was shed." The gravely silent, well-groomed girls also caught the eye of photographer Roman Vishniak, who did a series of photos of the family, which recently toured the world in an exhibition of his works and is also in the permanent collection of the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum. Life in wartime Cleveland was difficult. My grandmother received the shattering news of her parents' deaths soon after they arrived, and my mother recalls her sobbing in the bathroom and not coming out. My Aunt Karen said the family was never whole again after the trauma of their immigration and leaving behind loved ones. My grandfather, Werner, worked 3 jobs: as a salesman for Cook Coffee, where he was #2 salesman of the year, as a door-to-door salesman, selling Electrolux vacuums to other German refugees, and on the night shift at a defense factory on a tool and die machine. He also was in the upholstery business and had a brief stint in the diamond trade until, with my grandmother's management help and business acumen, they acquired the rental properties in Cleveland, which led to financial stability and success. My grandparents found their place among other German and Austrian Jewish immigrants in Cleveland, belonging to Gates of Hope Synagogue and living in a German-speaking microcosm. Where was my mother? Where was my mother in all of this? Pretty much a lost child. Often hungry, often overlooked in the chaos, she slept in a crib until she was 12 years old in their Lakeview Avenue apartment in the Glenville district. Eventually, they moved to Cleveland Heights on Hampshire Road and then to their house on Euclid Heights Boulevard, where she had her own bed. The beginning was not easy for the girls. My mother can recall people recoiling when they heard them speaking German on the RTA bus. It was the 1940s, and anti-German sentiment was high. My mother refused to speak German once she started school. Many years later, at the age of 20, she shocked my grandfather on a visit to his brother, who had escaped to Chile, when she greeted her uncle in flawless German. According to my mother, my Aunt Karen, who is here today, and only 18 months older than my mother, took her in as her own little child, caring for and tending to her. Together, they created fantasy worlds of play, dressing their paper dolls for hours and listening to music, which my mother found to be the ultimate escape and source of peace. The girls took art classes at the museum and piano lessons together, and while at Heights High, they took out a Metropolitan Opera subscription, preparing for the Saturday afternoon broadcasts with librettos from the library. They both worked hard to attend Ivy League universities, their dream of success, and both succeeded. But these years had their own psychological difficulties for my mother. Her oldest sister, Marion, was the town beauty, and Karen was both brilliant and the star of the Heights Choir. My mother felt she was in their shadow, both at home and at school. During college, my mother met my father, Marvin, on a blind date fixed up by her friend, his first cousin, Natalie, who's also here today. After that, she ran into him all summer at the Case Library before deciding to transfer to Case to pursue the relationship, unbeknownst to him. My parents' marriage was not easy. My father was the Yiddish-speaking son of my then wealthy grandfather's barber. My father really seemed to emerge out of the shtetl without much skill at modern life, other than as a student and then physician. My father adored my mother unconditionally, but my mother never quite reconciled herself to their marriage. Though she appreciated my father's intelligence and talent as a physician. She was his office manager. She could type 100+ words a minute and spot a spelling or grammar error a mile away. His administrator and recruiter, as well as the family financial manager and investor. She made all the decisions, and all their considerable success is due to her. She was an amazing mother to 5 children. For the first 10 years of my life as the oldest, she was either pregnant or folding diapers or both. There was always a baby in the playpen in the living room and a toddler running around half naked for potty training. Play was encouraged, and she was a free thinker in her mothering, not paying attention to any trends or Dr. Spock. She nursed her babies in an age when formula was pushed. She'd always say, never interrupt a child at play, or never wake a sleeping baby. No schedules. She encouraged us to grow into ourselves. She never checked our homework or grades, just trusted us to do well, and we did. She had deep insight into who we all were as people, and would go to the ends of the earth for us. Any glimmer of talent or interest was fed and nurtured to fruition. There were piano, violin, oboe, cello, and recorder lessons, and ballet school, singing angels rehearsals, and Hebrew school. My father helped out a great deal with the driving, but she was still endlessly carpooling. Our house was open to all the kids of the neighborhood. She had several sixth children, in addition to my father, of course. There was pretty much an endless parade of little kids in and out of the house, and other mothers would send their kids to our house. She would feed all comers. I had friends who came to my house as an escape from their own strict households. Our front lawn was the street center for summer night games of Spud. Our backyard was the scene of after-school reenactments of Lost in Space. Her intense years of mothering were bracketed by her career as an educator. During the early years of my life, she taught French and German in high school while my father was in medical school. During the later years of my younger siblings' school years, she went back to work as a learning disability specialist in the Cleveland Public Schools. This work was tough, and she carried a resignation letter in her purse in order to get herself through each day. During that time, she also nursed and cared for her own parents as they took ill. She was a wonderful and devoted daughter, and a close and caring sister. Our school vacations were often spent with our cousins. Marion would bring her family from California, and Karen's kids would come from Boston, or we would travel there. Our gatherings were always spent with us kids busily putting together plays for the adults, directed by yours truly, in partnership with my cousin Michelle. Two of Marion's children, David and Michelle, lived with us and attended Hilltop School for a semester at different times. Several of my cousins are here today as well. Despite the geography, the sisters stayed close and made sure we knew our cousins. Her active mothering didn't end with our coming of age. She remained involved with all of our lives, always full of questions and suggestions and wanting to know everything. She and my father would drive to wherever we were to help us out whenever we needed. They never stopped parenting. My mother also treasured her relationships with her 14 grandchildren, often flying for athletic competitions, performances, graduations, and other milestone events. She took trips with various grandchildren. As the only grandchildren in town, my kids were often at my parents' house and off on excursions with them. She loved to travel. She was always up for a trip at the drop of a hat. She loved road trips and would go everywhere with my stalwart father at the wheel, no matter how many days on the road. In her middle years, she was a runner, running at the JCC in the mornings and even doing the occasional marathon, which probably took her the whole day, but she did it. Later, she joined the Cleveland Hiking Club, and for the last 20-plus years of her life, until she was too ill, she and my father hiked daily in the Cleveland metro parks, often 10 miles a day. She also loved going to the movies and thrift stores. She couldn't pass up a coupon or a sale or a free lunch. She had a very active mind. She was infinitely curious about everything and everyone. It was exhaustive and could be exhausting if you were the subject. She read all my father's medical journals. The daily newspaper was compulsory, and the Cleveland Jewish News sacred. Later in life, she, like her sisters, became more and more interested in the history of the Holocaust, and she read often and deeply on related topics. She was a member of the Cleveland chapter of Child Survivors of the Holocaust and even docented at the Maltz Museum. She always had many relationships in her life. She loved interviewing people about their lives, and half the fun of the hiking club was talking to different people from different walks of life. She played Mahjong twice a week with 2 different groups and went out to couples dinners with a large group of Heights High classmates and had lunch once a month with a more intimate group of friends, many of whom are here today. Even in the assisted living residences of the past 2 years, she was interviewing her aides and caretakers. She loved to laugh at herself. She would beg me to do imitations of her and loved when we did any shtick about her eccentricities, of which there were many. The scars of her childhood deprivations and traumas left an indelible mark on her. She had a streak of rage and an aggressive approach to getting everything she could out of life, everything owed to her. And in many ways she did. She had family, friends, adventure, interests, and material comfort. And, of course, soft-serve ice cream. The past 2 years were really a continuation of her tale as a survivor. Diagnosed with pancreatic cancer over 2 years ago and already suffering from Parkinson's, she continued to pursue travel and being with family. She went into assisted living at the beginning of COVID. We had to stand outside her window in the snow to see her. Then she survived catching the virus itself. Unfortunately, my father did not, and then she survived the loss of her spouse of 60 years last summer. In February, she moved to Phoenix into my sister Valerie's house with her husband Adam and their 4 children, and Valerie's infinitely loving care. Until her care needs dictated she be moved to another assisted living facility for 24-hour help. During the past 3 months, her other 4 children tag-teamed each other regularly in visiting her, so there was always someone with her there, even when Valerie traveled with her family. Her 7 adult grandchildren and her sister Karen were also in rotation and traveled out to Phoenix often. But her crowning achievement was her family, all gathered here today to celebrate her. She was so proud of all of us, Becky, Cynthia, Valerie, Victor, and Lydia, our partners Irad, Michael, Shoshana, Adam, and Paul, and all 14 of you beautiful grandchildren. And Mom, we are proud of you, all the hardships you overcame, how hard you fought for yourself and for us, and in recent years, how hard you fought your several illnesses and disabilities. Your voice will always be in our heads with your quirky and utterly unique way of looking at the world, your disregard for convention, and best of all, your shrieking laughter when we all got into joking around. I can actually hear you laughing at me saying that right now. We treasure the time we had with you and all you did for us and for the world. May you rest in peace. May your memory be a blessing for us all. Zichrona livracha. Thank you. My son Amnon will be followed by Julia, and then by her sister Karen and Karen's partner Peter.
For those of you who do not know me, I am Amnon, Renate Miller's first grandson. It's strange to be reading this eulogy so soon after lighting Grandpa's yahrzeit candle, the first one since his Shiva. I had just started to accept the feeling that someone I loved no longer walked this earth. Now there's another hole in my heart, and healing to be done that takes a really long time. It's also strange to be reading this eulogy because I've written one for her before. It was for a high school English project 15 years ago. I read it out loud to my class. We weren't specifically assigned to memorialize living family members, but I thought she'd get a kick out of it. And it was a little strange how much she liked her eulogy. When I read it to her, she cackled so hard her stomach hurt. Yeah, there was sadness involved in experiencing Grandma as I grew up, but boy was she her own comic relief. And that left a major impression on me. Through Grandma, I've learned a lot about how love can be that warm, fuzzy feeling, but complicated and excruciating. How you can struggle, maybe suffer here and there, yet remain curious, selfless, and hardworking. Raise a family, support them as they raise brilliant, beautiful families of their own, and watch Jeopardy reruns. Take your grandkids to the movies and read them bedtime stories with genuine enthusiasm. I don't think Grandma was that aware of how great she did, so I'm glad that she gets to live on through our memories. I hope to share mine in a way that would make her laugh. Grandma Pajama, Kashi and Banana, thank you, and I love you so much.
Hi, I'm Julia. I'm Renate Miller's first granddaughter. My earliest memory of my grandma is from a first grade visit to her house at 12 Sherwood Court. She gave me an assignment to organize the pots and pans in her kitchen. I remember sitting on her tiled floor with all of the cookware laid out as we strategized what should be stored together. I loved that day, not just because I love organizing things, but because I got to spend all day with Grandma as she entrusted me with this important task. Over the years, there were many more projects Grandma brainstormed for us to do during my visits, organizing papers, photographs, and slides, helping with computer tasks. We always had an agenda. But more often than not, we'd start working and end up hours later with nothing done, with Grandma having digressed on a long and winding tale about her family's escape from Germany, or perhaps giving me an entire who's who of the Cleveland Jewish community. But Grandma's house wasn't just about Grandma. Rather, it functioned as a home base for all sorts of shenanigans and mischief for me and my cousins, the Carmies. Grandma's house was our control room and command center. In winter, we'd play for hours outside in the deep Cleveland snow before succumbing to the warm relief of her house. Some days, we'd make up our own games, led by our fearless leader, Amnon, usually involving either sinister candlelit rituals or too much roughhousing for comfort. Even though Grandma didn't play with us, some aspect of these games always hinged on the physical arrangement of her house or her presence there. In other words, if we tried to play them anywhere else, they just wouldn't be as fun. There were so many things my grandma loved: Jeopardy, long plastic spoons, sheet cake from the supermarket, going to the movies, soft serve ice cream. She loved to travel and hike, often together. In her older years, she loved her Parkinson's gym, In Motion. She loved the gizmos and gadgets that she kept in her fire truck red walker, which she also loved. She loved hospital socks with sticky pads on the bottom. She loved very cold fruit and very hot everything else. She loved classical music and could identify a piece after just a brief listen. She loved Cleveland and its Jewish community. And of course, whether it be the military commissary or a speaker event with a free luncheon, she loved a good bargain. My grandma wasn't perfect, if her refrigerator was any indication. With products ranging anywhere from 1 month to 10 years past their expiration dates, it was an eat at your own risk type of situation. But throughout my first quarter century of life, Grandma was always there for me, and I found myself wanting to consult her whenever I had a big decision to make. I remember, for example, calling her from my dorm room my freshman year of college for advice as I struggled to decide which classes to take. She also never failed to visit me no matter where in the world I was living, whether it be Indiana or Atlanta, New Zealand or New Haven. As I have had the privilege to move through this world with every opportunity at my disposal, I think about how I got to be so lucky. I know that what I may perceive as this luck is actually a result of the very conscious, concerted efforts of my grandma and her family only a couple of generations before me, when they escaped Nazi Germany on a 12-passenger ship packed with 1,200 Jews. If my grandma and her family hadn't successfully made this passage, I wouldn't be here today. Whenever I feel disillusioned with the state of our country, I try to think about Grandma's perspective. She believed America to be the greatest country, a land of opportunity. I am able to live as I do partially because of the life my grandma's parents fought to give her and the life she was able to give her own children. Grandma, I feel so proud to be a part of your legacy. Thank you.
Can you all hear me? Oh, okay, thank you. Thank you all for being here and being so supportive. My younger sister Renate and I were very close throughout our lives. For quite a while during our childhood, even though a year and a half apart in age, we were the same height and build and looked enough alike that people thought we were twins. We shared all our interests and were total companions until our late teenage years when I went off to college in New York City. Renate's birth year, 1937, was a terribly stressful time to bring a Jewish child into the world in Hamburg, Germany. I, at 1.5, had no understanding of the stresses put on my parents at this time. Most likely, Renate did not receive the level of attention and care that our parents were able to give to Marion, born in 1932, and I, who was unequivocally welcomed in 1936 as a much-wanted second child. For me, a new baby sister was a delight. I even would share my narrow, single high-chair seat while holding baby Renate tightly on my lap. Our cribs were next to each other in our parents' bedroom in an apartment building in the Jewish neighborhood of Hamburg. We had already been forced to move out of another apartment building in that same neighborhood, which no longer allowed Jews. Renate and I were great playmates throughout our childhood. We loved making up stories about the lives of the paper dolls my mother often bought for us, cardboard cutout one-dimensional dolls with paper wardrobes to be also cut out of the paper doll book. We would create stories that would fit the current paper cutout clothes we dressed them with. We would lay them all out on the floor and create imaginary scenarios, filling the hours after school. We also loved doing jigsaw puzzles together and competed to see who could put in the very last piece by hiding pieces in our palms so we could be the winning sister. The Disney puzzles were our favorites, and we did them over and over. Our parents had brought some German board games with them on our escape to America. We adored those games and often included Marion for three-way contests of Mensch, ärger dich nicht, later called Sorry, in an English version of this game we loved. During a heavy snowstorm-canceled week for a week during Renate's last year in elementary school, we learned a new card game called Canasta, which we got so addicted to that we spent an entire week's snow-related school closure time playing the card game all day long, not even taking the time to change out of our pajamas. When our mother, whom we called Ma, bought a Sunbeam cake mixer appliance, we spent every day after school making a new cake recipe in the order they appeared in the instruction booklet until Ma got tired of shopping for more cake ingredients. It pained us both that we had to quit making cakes before we had reached the end of the recipe book. Renate and I even loved making fudge from scratch after I learned the recipe from my cooking class at school. We had a problem getting Ma to keep supplying us with the necessary ingredients for fudge making. When she objected to our endeavor, we ended up hiding the fudge we made under my bed at night and indulged ourselves before we went to sleep. Of course, this delicious habit was unsustainable. Another passion we shared was movie-going. When a picture we wanted to see was playing outside of our neighborhood, we would walk the 2 or 3 miles it took to get there. No parental chauffeuring was available to us. We used our weekly allowance, $0.10 a week, to get us into those movies, which cost exactly that amount. When the movie The Great Caruso came to town with Mario Lanza in the title role, we walked quite a distance to see it more than once. This was the beginning of our great passion for opera. All 3 of us Gumprecht sisters loved competing in the Cleveland Press annual spelling contest for Cleveland area school children, with first prize meaning a trip to the capital of Washington. We would spend time drilling each other on the correct spelling of the words in the official word lists. One year, the 3 of us had the goal of becoming the champions of our respective schools, Marion in the high school, I in junior high, and Renate in elementary school. Most of our schoolmates didn't share our strong passion for spelling. We were not coddled by our parents. It was a different age. We tried ice skating alone together on the frozen pond in a nearby park, using skates Ma had bought us second-hand that had thick blades, no ankle support, and ill-fitted our feet. Naturally, we failed miserably at ice skating and walked or limped home alone with frozen toes and fingers. We learned at school about the American holiday Halloween and the practice of extorting treats from one's neighbors by trick or treating, and went out on our own before the ages of 11 and 12, again with no parental support or guidance and no costumes. But we loved the adventure of it. We wanted to learn to ride a bike, so our parents gave us one two-wheeler, full bike, for the three of us to share. We had no lessons or parental guidance in learning to ride a bike. We tried to teach ourselves balance by riding in and falling against the corridor walls of our second-floor apartment. Again, we had no guidance, and all three of us failed at learning to ride a bicycle. Later in life, I had the good fortune of having three sons, all of whom knew how to ride a bike. My oldest son became a master bicyclist. He was the youngest member of the board of American Youth Hostels, which he joined at age 14, and took many other teenagers on rides throughout the Boston area. He spent many hours surveying those areas and then drew perfect maps free-handed to show the routes. He also participated in what was called a double century, where he would ride 100 miles north to Vermont, stay overnight, and then ride back to Boston. And why do I tell you this? It's because this was the inspiration for me to finally learn how to ride a bicycle. He helped me, and I became so adept at it that I even took 2 years' worth of week-long bicycle trips, the first in New Hampshire over the hills, and the second in Vermont, and loved every moment of it. My parents were willing to give us piano lessons, but didn't take an interest or time to organize 3 girls' practice times at the piano, nor did they supervise our practice. And yet both our parents were skilled pianists. Marion and I would lie in bed at night listening to my mother play her beautiful repertoire perfectly, trying to beat each other out to see who could decide what the name of the piece was she was playing as we were trying to go to sleep. But there was not any guidance for us in learning how to play the piano. We were on our own. Our parents created us to be independent individuals. Renate and I loved playing duets together. One of our favorites was the overture to Mozart's Marriage of Figaro. Having never heard the opera performed, we played it at a comfortable tempo for us, which had no relation whatsoever to the speed at which violins are expected to play it in the orchestra. But we loved it anyway in our ignorance. You know the overture which goes da-da-da-yum, da-da-da-yum. Well, we did it da-da-da-da-dum, da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da, and we loved it. It was beautiful at that tempo. We had no clue. After our somewhat underprivileged childhood, Renate, as a parent, always thought of what was the best for her children and her grandchildren, meaning music lessons for her children and a very special camp in upstate Vermont, and support and guidance for their professional education and very beautiful weddings. I will miss Renate's companionship and intelligence and energy for life, and her skill at jigsaw puzzles. She was a fighter. Thank you.
Can you stay with me?
You want me to stay with you?
Yeah.
Yes?
Yeah.
Okay.
Let me get my mask
Last
on.
night, Peter and I stayed up till 3 a.m. working on his talk, which I thought we would hand out to you, but Becky said it was okay for another speaker, so here we are.
Thank you, Becky. I'm Peter Schuntermann, and a good friend of Karen's, and I want to thank Karen's family for extending their friendship to me for many years. I've known Renate for many years, and also their oldest sister, Marion. There was something that connected us from the beginning, and I guess there is a word really for, it's hard to translate in English, but some of you may know the word Heimat. I immigrated to the States in 1959 and made my adult life here. And my talk, thank you, my talk will be about this theme. There is a little street in Hamburg named Werderstraße. This was the street where Renate Miller and her sister Karen and Marion were living with their parents in the 1930s, before and during World War II. I knew the street when I was 5 years old, living with my family around the corner on a street named Parkallee. I and my sister, Christiane, sometimes walked down to the corner where Werderstraße crossed Parkallee, which became my family street in 1938. We played with other children on the street when it was nice outside. My family moved there in 1938 under circumstances that are still painful for me to talk about. My father's membership in the Nazi Party may have been the connection offering us the Parkallee apartment, which appeared to have been quickly abandoned by a Jewish family who escaped to Holland. Tragically, this family were later caught and killed in Auschwitz, according to the current Stolperstein's inscription, a commemorative stumbling block in front of the house, which I've been visiting from time to time when I was in Germany. Werderstraße was paved with dark gray cobblestones. I wondered then, as a boy, why did it not have a smooth asphalt surface like Parkallee, on which we could easily roller skate? I wondered whether the people who paved streets with asphalt had forgotten to finish paving Werderstraße. A few blocks away from Werderstraße, Parkallee fed into a beautiful park called Innocentia Park, our favorite place for sledding in the winter. As curious children, I and my sister looked from the street crossing deep into Werderstraße. We rarely saw people or even children with whom you could play. Many people in some of the streets around us did not leave their homes, which was why these streets were quiet. Children living there did not play in those streets. My memories about Werderstraße eventually went to sleep. They began to wake up many years later after I had emigrated to the United States in 1959. In subsequent decades, the world was dramatically changing, and so was Germany, especially Hamburg. I again visited Werderstraße, which had changed too, but it was still there, darkly brooding with its cobblestone pavement and chestnut trees. The building where the Gumprecht girls lived had been totally destroyed by British bombs. I had now learned why the street had been so quiet during the time I lived around the corner and why no children were outside playing there. Even as a 5 or 6 year old, one notices the things that do not get talked about at that time. That time, when I was 5 years old, was 1939, the beginning of World War II. Many Jewish families lived in that neighborhood. There were 2 synagogues nearby. Most of the Jewish families were afraid to go outside for fear of verbal and sometimes physical abuse by anti-Semitic neighbors. Many apartments were overcrowded, including on Werderstraße. Often 2 or even 3 families were made to live in one apartment. Werderstraße had become a place of fear and grieving. In 2013, in the United States, I met the 3 Gumprecht sisters who, in their childhood in 1938, had lived with their parents in Werderstraße. Imagine my surprise when Karen showed me a photo of all 3 of them standing on the expansive lawn of the Innocentia Park on a sunny and beautiful day. Renate less than 2 years old, Karen maybe 3.5, and Marion maybe 7 years old, holding the hands of her younger sisters. Only Marion is smiling and looking at the camera. She was old enough to do that. Their sisters seemed subtly preoccupied. Looking at this photo for a little while is like meeting these little girls in their world and the Innocentia Park, the park which also had been my world. In July 1941, 3 months before the deportations in Hamburg began, 3 months before then, these 3 girls left Germany with their parents for America. To grow up and to enjoy life with their own children and grandchildren. For Renate, Karen, and Marion, and me, sharing these memories about Werderstraße and the Innocentia Park helped us discover how we are rooted in the same history. Thank you.
Please rise for the El Male. El Male Rachamim, Shochein Babromim, Hamsei Menucha Nechona, Tochat Kanfei, Hashechinah, Im Kiroshim Utehorim, Kizohar Harakia, Masirim, Et Nishmat Rina Bat Avraham V'Sara, Shahachal Yolama, Bul Harachamim, Yastireha b'seita kinafov li'olamim v'yitzror hachayim et nishmata Adonai hu nachalata v'tanuach b'shalom al mishkava v'nomar
Let's be seated, everyone. We want to offer our condolences to the family, to Becky and Erod, Cynthia and Michael, Valerie and Adam, Victor and Shoshana, Lydia and Paul, to the children, to the grandchildren, Amnon, Aryeh, Yardena, Julia, Noah, Lauren, Eden, Shai, Saul, Annabelle, Atticus, Tess, Zach, and Eli. And to Karen, our condolences as well. We'll be moving now by processional to the burial spot at Lakeview Cemetery. Following the burial at Lakeview, family will be receiving visitors for the Shiva visitation following services and until 6 p.m. The address is 24810 Cedar Road in Beechwood, 24810 Cedar Road in Beechwood. We're going to try to keep the driveway open for those who need help or do not have the ability to walk longer distances. So let's keep that in mind, and others can park on Community Drive or in Legacy Village across the street. Shiva will be today until 6 p.m., tomorrow from 10 a.m. to 3 p.m. Please remain in your seats for just another moment, but the pallbearers should now come forward.
Pallbearers, we're going to have you step with Mr. Miller. Maybe go up the aisle. Let you get close. You're going to get some gloves first. Pallbearers, follow me with the gloves. Mr. Pallbearers, follow me, please.
Please rise. לדוד מזמור לאדוני הארץ ומלואה, תבל ויושביה, יהיו על ימים מסעדה, ועל נהרות יכונניה. מי יעלה בהר אדוני, ומי יקום במקום קדשו, וכי כפיים ובר לבב, אשר לא נשא לשווא נפשי ולא נשבע במרמה. ייסוב לרחמי אדוני, ושכן אלוהי איתו.
Right back to your cars. Your cars are to the right. You exit out the chapel to the right. The interment will be at the Lakeview Cemetery. We ask that those going to that service please return directly to your cars. Put on your lights and your hazard lights. Thank you.
Dr. Letterman to break the rules. I feel very comfortable doing so.
Yeah, I want to forget it.
You have to deal with it.
Friends, we gather together this morning to celebrate the life and to honor the memory of Eugenia Weinberg. Eugenia's family so very much appreciates your presence, those of you who are here with us, and the presence of those of you who are live streaming from, as I understand it, around the world. Your presence both here and throughout the world offers the family a great deal of comfort and support. We very much appreciate your presence here with us. Adonai ma'adam v'teda ehu ben enosh v'chashvehu. O Lord, what are we that you have regard for us? What are we that you are mindful of us? We are like a breath, our days are as a passing shadow. We come and we go like grass, which in the morning shoots up renewed, in the evening it fades and it withers. You cause us to turn to dust, saying, return, you mortal creatures. Would that we were wise, that we understood whither we are going. For when we die, we carry nothing away. Our glory does not accompany us. Mark the wholehearted and behold the upright. They shall have peace. The author of the first of the Bible's 150 Psalms describes for us in language that is both poignant and succinct the nature of the good life and the fruits of that life. Happy are those who have not followed the counsel of the wicked, nor taken the path of sinners, nor joined the company of the insolent. Rather, the teaching of God is their delight, and they study that teaching day and night. They are like a tree planted beside streams of water that yields its fruit in its season, whose foliage never fades, and whose fruit always flourishes. Let us take comfort now together in the 23rd Psalm. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He maketh me to lie down in green pastures. He leadeth me beside the still waters. He restoreth my soul. He guideth me in straight paths for his name's sake. Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for thou art with me. Thy rod and thy staff, they comfort me. Thou preparest a table before me in the presence of mine enemies. Thou hast anointed my head with oil, my cup runneth over. Surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life, and I shall dwell in the house of the Lord forever. Kohelet, the author of the biblical book of Ecclesiastes, reminds us that for everything there is a season, a time for every experience under the heavens, a time to be born and a time to die, a time to plant and a time to uproot what is planted, a time to tear down and a time to build up, a time to weep and a time to laugh, a time to grieve and a time to dance, a time to throw stones and a time to gather stones, a time